A lot of you getting involved in this debate. Chaos on the streets of Washington, D.C. To be honest, by British standards, it was fairly tame, in my opinion. It was Halloween, and it's forced the mayor to take drastic action. She's declared the city a curfew zone for under-18s. Now, this is an emergency order, comes after this brawl in the area called the Navy Yard here in D.C. on Friday night. Police say it threatened public safety. Have a look. That's a big green sort of common area, communal area, and all those people there, if you're watching in the green uniforms, they are of course the National Guard. They look like forces to all intents and purposes, and there was a lot of them, as you could see, teenagers running everywhere. Well, these teenagers, because of that misbehaviour, they'd now been banned from going out between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. This is something that happens whenever there are youth-fuelled disturbances and violent clashes across the capital. Mayor Muriel Bowser says the curfew will run for 4 nights, and she says it's about protecting lives, not punishing kids. Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind. The more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you. Let's get the take of former FBI Special Agent James Hamilton. James, good evening. Thank you for joining me. Now, this is a radical policy to us Brits. We don't have anything like this, and it would really clash with this idea that the state should stay out of family life and let us get on with parenting. But also, sometimes it's quite nice to have the help of the state on certain issues when it comes to controlling children. Is it controversial here? How long has this been a policy that states can enact?
Hey, good to see you. It's been a while for them. DC's done this a couple of times, and going back in the 90s, they started to do this, and it's not all the time, but it's one of these little, well, it's a lever or a tool that the mayor can use in, like you said, in extreme circumstances. I agree with you. I thought the video looked rather tame, but she decided to take this step, and we'll see what happens. This could go one of two ways, but I applaud her courage for making a decision. But it's going to be interesting, and it's difficult to enforce, by the way.
I was just going to say, how easy is it to enforce? Because there was 4 youngsters were arrested here, 1 18-year-old and 3 of them were under 18. One of the special guard got pushed over but wasn't actually hurt. I mean, genuinely, it sounds fairly tame. It was Halloween. They're all high on sweets and sugar and candy, if not anything else, to be completely honest, what it smells like when you're walking down the pavement here in DC. I don't know what I was going to say then. I got lost thinking about sweeties and candy and whether they were all high. But it's a difficult situation to police. That's what I was going to say. How do they enforce it, James?
Right. Unlike, in London with the Met, this is a multi-agency type of situation you've got on the streets of D.C. I was just there, and yeah, you have MPD, which is the Metropolitan Police Department, the D.C. Uniformed Police that you're used to seeing. But like, for instance, at Halloween night, they had the Capitol Police, National Guard, and then there's this federal task force that's walking around, and that's, FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, ATF. So it's a recipe for, a lot of confusion, for one, not shared tactics. Two, you see in the video, National Guardsmen running after kids. It gets very dicey here. MPD or uniform officers who arrest people on the daily, they're pretty good at it, and they know how to do these things. They have tactics, but it all changes when you start to employ the military and other federal agencies to arrest children for violating a curfew. So, luckily, last 2 nights we haven't any real bad violence, but, it could set off something obviously very, very quickly if, people lose their minds and don't act appropriately and use too much force, and it's a recipe for sure.
Let's bring in Bob and Victoria here in the studio, because I think it's such a good debate point, this. Victoria, as you said, you're like me, a kind of libertarian at heart, but are you on board with this as a special measure to make the streets safer after dark? And also, it also, you could argue, is safer for the teenagers, because they're not out there potentially getting themselves into trouble.
Well, first off, I was always taught as a kid that nothing good happens after midnight. And so an 11 p.m. curfew would kind of align with that, that you always had to be home before midnight, because afterwards nefarious things happened. But I also want to talk about, this curfew has been implemented. We had one over the summer here in DC, but also just from my own personal experience, I live in Arlington, Virginia, just across the way from DC, and I go to the mall, for example, and there's been teenagers in the past that will throw food onto the food court from 3 stories up, because they come in gangs of 6 to 10 people. Before we just recently here in DC, we elevated the barriers onto the metro, but before that they would jump across them all the time. They still do that now. Some of them have very high jumps, so they will still evade fares. So there's a track record with certain individuals that have a track record of law breaking. They're not being punished, right? Just fare evasion. There is a sign on every single metro station on multiple entrances that fare evasion is a crime. If you don't persecute that, then they get kind of emboldened, I believe, to create further chaos and to potentially eventually lead to actually serious crimes. And also, we have examples from DC in the past couple of years where teenagers have committed serious crimes and they have not been tried as adults. Particularly thinking of an Uber driver that was basically murdered by 2 teenagers, and those teenagers, as far as I remember, did not get the sentence that an adult would. And so, on one hand, you want to have adult rights, but you also don't want to have adult responsibilities. And so, until those 2 things are considered even, one has got to give. And in this case, the freedoms give because people don't understand what those responsibilities are in most cases.
Bob, is this the result of a Biden government that got very soft on discipline over several years, and that the kids no longer respect authority?
Oh, let's not start blaming Joe Biden for the little recess screeching, basically, which is what it's the equivalent of, that a principal has to deal with every day when the kids are out in the yard. So I think that's a little ridiculous. I do think that, I love you, but I had to say that
okay.
already.
I'm all right. I've got to think.
I think that actually it's more a result, what Bowser did, of the fact that she wants to look a little tough for Trump and be a little supportive of him. So that's where the politics really plays into this. And I do think that, by the way, that she has every right to do a curfew and that it works, and parents welcome the help. And I'm surprised that you haven't used curfews more, if that's the story.
We don't have this in the UK ever.
Kids don't screech in recess?
Kids are out of control in the UK. We've got
You amazingly have 2 of them, 17 and 22.
Yeah, I've got 3 of them, but mine are very well behaved, let me tell you. Oh, she says, with her fingers crossed. But actually, you've got very similar things here. You've got these bikes that you can book on your phone, which are fairly cheap and are the criminal's best accessory, aren't they? Because they can just bomb around on these bikes. They are wayward in the UK. They've all got masks on now because apparently that was normal during COVID. So everyone's got their faces covered up, and that gives them a level of power and sort of anonymity, which they're delighted about, James. And I think, just last point to you then, as a former FBI special agent, this idea that minor crime, as Victoria was saying, escalates if you don't nip it in the bud, you end up with adults then, the children who grow up into adults who are committing serious crime. We got to clamp down on kids.
Yeah, you definitely see that. If you talk to criminals, you know, they didn't just start when they became 21, 22-year-olds, you know, at least not my experience. I would say one nice thing about this this curfew is that if they do catch somebody and they, you know, the penalty is not just them paying a fine or doing some type of community service or time, but the parent is held accountable as well. And it's like $500 and it goes up from there. But, you know, that's when you start to see parents being held responsible for the actions of their children, you know, now you're getting somewhere, I think. I think it's always a misstep if you're trying to hold a child to something and the parent has no skin in the game, if you will. So that's a good thing. But I agree with, you know, the lady's comment about, you know, they start young and you need to get them while you can and let them know that there are consequences. And we do live in the rule of law here in the U.S. and we need to follow it. That's what we do here.
Well, in the UK, we've never had more laws than we have now, but we've also never had so much crime and so much violent crime. And it does feel like the fabric of society is just torn incredibly thin at the moment, made worse, I have to say, since 2020, since lockdown rules, with these teenagers particularly. We kept them in their bedrooms, we got them hooked on their devices, and also hooked on a lot of marijuana as well. It's the same in London as it is here, and somehow we have to fix all of that, Victoria. How do we start to we have to help kids as well as punishing them. We have to understand that a lot of these kids went through a lot and they've never even got their careers or their education back on track.
Well, you know, that's a good question. Last year, during the election, Kamala Harris came under fire when, during one rally, she said, you know, these are our kids. And parents, particularly on the right, got mad, saying, you know, you actually don't have your own children. You're a stepmother, but you actually have never parented a child from, you know, birth up to adulthood. So you going out, Kamala Harris, and saying that these are our kids, you have very little knowledge of what it is like to parent. And, you know, I think that really underscores the level of the debate that we have, right? Is it the state's children or are these parents' children? And what degree are parents parenting? And to what degree, you know, are communities do communities have to raise children, raise youth? And, you know, in COVID, obviously it impacted the younger generation, I think, greatly. But I also think that just the fabric of society, people are reliant a lot less on each other, you know, on neighbors. You know, my husband, who grew up in the UK, you know, he tells me all the time about some of his great childhood friends whose, you know, parents maybe worked late, and his mom would know, you know, so and so got off the bus and got home, and, you know, the parents would kind of look out for one another, and you know, the parents would always know each other. They would know all the kids in the neighborhood. They would check in on each other. You know, I just don't know if maybe we don't have that neighborhood structure in a lot of cities in the U.S. because we're so spread out in suburbs versus, you know, my husband grew up in a row of attached houses, so maybe just that kind of physical distance contributes to that as well. But you know, I think that is just kind of a greater society of this community policing in terms of, you know, this interwoven fabric versus the government coming in and telling people what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, last word?
Well, I was the spokesman for the White House Drug Office for 6 years and also the House Narcotics Committee for another 6 years. And I learned a little something, and that is that parenting is the key. That the kitchen table is where you can teach your children the values that they should have. And that's the most important thing you can do, is have a gathering with your family and to tell them about not only marijuana but alcohol and also behavior. And if you do that, it goes a long way towards solving the problem.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that. It's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, former FBI Special Agent James Hamilton.